God says there is enough, and there is always enough. I'll tell you a story. When I was in college, I had a crush on a girl, and as I was wont to do, I would bake. So I set out to make a cake, and when you're in college, you're not always thinking straight, so I didn't realize that I needed 2 cups of flour for this cake, and I only had about 1.5 cups. So I had to figure out a way to, make up the difference, to bridge the gap. So I started looking around in the pantry, and you can imagine a college guy's pantry, what's in it. I started just looking for any kind of white powder. I found some salt, and so I put a little bit more of that in there because, we like salt. So I found, some baking soda and put some of that in there. And then I found this thing called cream of tartar. And I thought, well, I want the cake to be creamy, so I put it in there, and we were able to make it equal out about 2 cups. And, made the cake, and it seemed to be all right. It was a wonder I was single for so long. I just didn't think, I thought there'd be enough, and there wasn't enough, but it turns out there is always enough with God. With God, there's a different reality than the one that we live with. And for all of us in these anxious times, we need a glimpse of a different reality. We heard a lot in the election Tuesday night. We heard a lot about, will there be enough votes here and enough votes in this county? And are there enough votes from this state to make any difference? And can this candidate get this many votes from this sector of the populace? And then after that, and for the next month or so, we're going to be hearing about this fiscal cliff, and we'll hear arguments on one side or the other about the economy. And is there enough room to find common ground? And are there enough spending cuts that we can make to balance the budget? And can we raise enough revenue in different ways to balance the budget? Will there be enough? And this economy of scarcity that we live with day in and day out comes to us in many, many ways. Not only in the news, but also in commercials. Anytime you see a commercial, it's begging and it's tugging on those strings that you have in your psyche that says, there is not enough, you better get yours before there is none left. And if you are anxious in those ways, Elijah's voice comes to you like a bell. And it says that where God reigns, there is enough. So the story comes to us from Sidon, the town of Zarephath, which is a nowhere town in Sidon. Sidon was the place that Jezebel came from. And in the first book of Kings, there's a story about all the kings that had done evil in the sight of the Lord. King Ahab was the king of the day, and he had done more evil in the sight of the Lord than any other king before him. So he was a really bad guy. The worst thing that he did was he married Jezebel, who was from Sidon, and in Sidon they worshiped the god Baal. Now the god Baal was a god of prosperity, a god who brought rain to the harvest, a god who provided for his people. God was so mad at Ahab that he sent Elijah to Ahab, and he said, Elijah, tell Ahab there's going to be a drought. Things are going to dry up, and he will see where this Baal has left him. So there's a drought. And God sends Elijah to a wadi, which is a wet area during a time of drought. He sends him to this wadi that's east of the Jordan River. Now, if you remember your Old Testament history, you know that the Israelites came from east of the Jordan River and crossed over into Canaan, into the land of milk and honey. So now in a time of drought, God sends Elijah back across the river Jordan, to the east of the Jordan River, to where his people came from. In a time of drought, God sent Elijah back. Now, who is going to provide for Elijah during this time? If you're a Baltimore football fan, this should be easy. Who provided for Elijah? The ravens. Thank you. The first 7 verses of this chapter, God sends Elijah off to this wadi in the middle of a drought. Elijah's saying, how am I going to get food during a drought in a wadi? And the ravens came and dropped meat to him. Ravens are birds of prey, predatory animals. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, they are symbols of dark forces, and yet these dark forces are the ones bringing food, sustaining God's prophet. Now think about that. So then we get this story. The wadi dries up. There's no more water. God says to Elijah, go to Zarephath, which is in Sidon. There you will meet a widow who will provide for you. So Elijah must be thinking, what's going on here? I have to go to a territory in which they don't worship God. They worship the enemy God. And somehow this widow is going to provide for me? This must be something out of Downton Abbey, some kind of rich widow, some kind of lady dowager or something. So Elijah packs his bags and goes to Sidon. There he meets a widow who has just enough flour, just enough meal, and just enough oil to bake a final meal before she and her son die. Now, what must Elijah be thinking? God, how can you provide for me in this time of scarcity? There is nothing here. There is no water. There is no food left. How are you going to provide for me? And if you are like me, these questions keep you up at night. How can I provide for my family? Will there be enough money at the end of the month? How can I make it to the next payday? How much more groceries can we afford? What bill will we have to let run over to the next month? How will God provide for me? If you're like me, these questions keep you up at night. How am I going to have enough to retire on? How am I going to provide for my children that I decided to bring into this world and raise with my wife? How can I take care of my aging parents? Will there be enough? Another story. After I was a priest in D.C., I was living in a small apartment, and I decided to have some friends over for soup. And I was making the soup, of course. And before we get too far into this, you need to know that I know how to make soup, all right? You throw a bunch of stuff in a pot, and you turn it on. So I did that, and I followed the recipe well, and I forget what kind of soup it was exactly, but I thought, all right, we got 8 people coming over, and so there'll be 9 people, and this is going to be enough for 9 people. It serves 8 to 10. So, I make my soup, and I start pouring the bowls of soup, and I start bringing them out to the table, and I begin to look at the pot, and I begin to look at the bowls of soup, and I begin to realize that I've only poured 3 bowls of soup so far. And I begin to question, will there be enough? How am I going to get this to be enough? I should get some water out of the tap and start pouring that in there, or just make some tea, boiling water, and pour that into the soup so there'll be enough to keep it going. And sure enough, I was able to serve all 9 people, and there was enough for seconds. And maybe it was just an optical illusion for me, but for me, that was a very spiritual moment in my life, because it told me that when I gave to others, there would always be enough. There would always be enough. And it spoke to me of God's reality, which is what Elijah speaks to this woman in the story. God says to this woman, or rather, Elijah says to this woman, "By the Lord my God, the jar will not run out, and the oil will not fail." Now, imagine saying that to a woman who is ready to make her last meal. A woman who has prepared herself psychologically and emotionally to die with her child. And you go to say to her, "There will be enough. By the Lord my God, there will be enough." I think in some ways we are like that woman, and people come to us preaching God's abundance. People come to us saying, "Do not be anxious. Do not worry. Every little thing is going to be all right. God will provide." Because where God reigns, there is abundance. I think there are people that come to us in our lives that say that, but we are too interested in hearing another reality. We are too interested in hearing the reality of scarcity. The reality that there is not enough and you better get yours or else you will be left behind. The reality that says you have to cut someone else in line to make sure that you get yours. This is the reality of kings, the reality of politics, the reality of our own economies. Do we dare let God's reality in? God's reality which says that the flour will not run out and the oil will not fail. Do we dare take a step into that new reality that says that as long as God is around, as long as God is with us, which is always, by the way, there will be enough. I think we are also like Elijah, though. I think we are sent off into barren wastelands. And what do we do there? What do we preach? What reality are we a part of? Something really fascinating happened this Tuesday. I know a lot of you were out and about on Election Day. I saw Aaron and Joe. They voted here at St. Margaret's. And I think there were a couple of others of you here. When you came to St. Margaret's to vote in the election this Tuesday, you got in a line. There was a line. And there were only a couple times during the day, I think once or twice, where it was less than 20 minutes long. And it was a cold day on Tuesday. All right, it was chilly. The wind was blowing. It was bright and clear. It was cold. So what we did is we offered coffee to people. And we offered this to the community. We said, if you want to come volunteer and make coffee, come do it. The coffee never ran out. There was always enough half and half. There was always enough sugar. There was always music, thanks to James. That's the kind of witness that we are called to be in the world. We are called to be like Elijah and be visionaries, be prophets of a God of abundance. Not just abundant provision, though, but abundant hospitality. Hospitality that says that if you want decaf, we'll make another pot of decaf. The coffee will not run out here. If you want hot chocolate, we'll look for hot chocolate in the pantry. And if we can't find it, we might send someone to Growls to get it because the hot chocolate will not run out here. We believe in a God of abundance. A God of abundant hot chocolate even. I joke because I realize that this God is abundant in much weightier matters. This is the same God who is abundant in mercy. This is the same God who is abundant beyond measure in forgiveness. This is the same God whose abundance in unconditional love gave His only Son for us. That is the kind of abundance that we are to preach. And that is the kind of abundance that we are meant to carry into the world as children of God. Can you live into that new reality? Can you say to your anxious neighbors, to your anxious spouse or partner, or to your anxious psyche, with God there is enough? Step into that reality with me. It is difficult, and it makes absolutely zero sense. But I believe it with the core of my being. That where God reigns, there is abundance. And with God, there is always enough. Amen.